Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Zero Touch Kubernetes for the Distributed Edge webinar. My name is Leah. I'm going to be your moderator today. I know most of you already know the drill, but I just wanted to cover a couple of housekeeping items. There's a Q&A option at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please use this to submit any questions you might have. We're definitely going to save time for Q&A at the end for both ZEDEDA and SUSE. So if we don't get to some of the live questions, we'll follow up via email. This webinar is going to be recorded and available on demand, so keep an eye out for a follow-up email with the slides in case you miss anything. So sit back, relax, enjoy. I know I wouldn't want to be anywhere else except listening about Kubernetes for the Distributed Edge on a Tuesday morning. And so now I'd like to introduce our speakers. First up, we have Jason. Jason Shepard is VP of Ecosystem here at ZEDEDA. Prior to joining ZEDEDA, Jason was CTO for Dell Technologies' Edge and IoT Solutions division. His proven track record as a thought leader in the market is evidenced through his leadership building up the award-winning Dell IoT Solutions Partner Program and establishing the vendor-neutral open-source EdgeX Foundry project to facilitate greater interoperability at the IoT edge. Jason is very active in the Linux Foundation's Edge Umbrella project and other key industry efforts focused on IoT and edge computing. Thanks for being here today. And we here at ZEDEDA are really excited that we have somebody from SUSE, Tom Colway. He's the Senior Director of Product Marketing, and there's no better person to talk about Tom than Tom himself. So take it away.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure I can follow up on Jason's very impressive sort of resume, but I'll try my best anyway. So my name's Tom Colway. By the accent, you could probably guess that I'm British. I live in West London in a place called Twickenham. I've been working in the open source industry for, I guess, something like 20 years now. Previously at MySQL MariaDB, and I was marketing director there for a while. So spent a lot of time in Finland of all places, because that's where a lot of the guys from MySQL are from. And then after that, I joined Canonical. So I was working for the guys behind Ubuntu, doing lots of OpenStack things. I was the director of cloud marketing at Canonical. So got to work with people like Mark Shuttleworth and people like that a great deal. And then I joined Rancher for two extremely sort of exciting hyper growth years, as initially as their head of European marketing, and then as the director of product marketing. Always loved a story, and really trying to sort of break sort of complex technical concepts down into easy to understand stories is something that I've always enjoyed. So I ended up doing that, did that for 2 years, and then Rancher was acquired by SUSE at the end of last year. And I find myself very fortunate now to be working for a company that's really very closely aligned to everything I liked about Rancher, which I'll talk about more in a while, and a much larger team. So there's more people to do things for me. So that's me.
Cool. Well, we certainly appreciate you being here, because it's like you guys have nothing going on. There was KubeCon, I guess a few weeks ago, and there's SUSECon coming up, and that little,
Well, that's actually started today. So
oh, really? Yeah. No, that's right.
Immediately after this webinar, people should go and check it out. The SUSECon live event. It's very good.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, definitely appreciate it. And I wonder if we cross paths, or at least it was 1 degree of separation, because I work with Mark at Ubuntu, when we were working with Ubuntu at Dell and whatnot. So Canonical.
Sure,
so yeah. No, definitely cool and certainly a small world, but I wouldn't want to paint it, as some people might say. So I guess next slide. Okay, so real quick, so we're going to kind of define which edge, because that is important. There's a lot of people that talk about edge computing, and there's these visions of, well, it's the my data center that's distributed a little bit out. It's like a smart sensor. So we'll talk about that a bit. Where are we playing in this conversation? Quick introduction on ZEDEDA, and then we'll talk. Tom will certainly run through SUSE value prop and what they've been up to. Specifically, ZEDEDA's has integrated Kubernetes into our workflow. So we'll talk about that. What are some of the challenges? Why is it different than what you might see in a data center? And then we'll have a live demo or a pre-recorded demo that you guys will get to see it in action in terms of how easy it is to automate Kubernetes formation on edge devices. If you've spent any time with Kubernetes in general, it's obviously a super important infrastructure foundation, but also it requires a certain skill set. This is also why you work with companies like SUSE and ZEDEDA and others to help from a kind of wrapping it up into a solution and commercial support and all that. But we've made it really simple to deploy on edge devices. And then we'll have questions. Definitely ask questions throughout. If you've got anything, we'll answer some if it makes sense in line, but otherwise at the end, we'll reserve plenty of time for questions. So next slide. Okay, so edge is a hot topic. There's a lot of clickbait out there saying, oh, the cloud's going to get eaten by the edge, the cloud's going away. Well, actually, edge computing without some semblance of cloud is basically just legacy apps running on-prem. So it is a continuum. We're going to see more and more compute happening in the field to complement cloud workloads, cloud resources. These are some Gartner stats. By the next couple of years, we're going to see a lot more workloads happening. Reasons include, everyone talks about latency as one of the driving factors, but actually what we see as ZEDEDA is actually bandwidth costs being one of the biggest things. It costs money to move data around. Security, privacy, autonomy, other widely cited reasons. And so we see a little mix of all the above for why we're seeing this shift and more distribution of compute. Next slide. Okay, so this kind of talks about an evolution, and it's a little bit more of the vision for longer term and why it's so important to build on an open foundation. So Internet of Things was the hot topic, in 2015 timeframe, and that was really more about embedded computing hitting scale. And it's not like IoT goes away. It's becoming, these connected devices are becoming more part of just everyday technology implementations. It's not like we talk about, I'm going to do some e-commerce today. Now it's just part of everyday life. So IoT is moving along. That's created more data, hence more devices online, and exponentially more than people. So then we need edge computing. Pendulum swinging back from centralized. The next big thing we think is coming is this notion of interconnected ecosystems driven through what we call trust fabric. So there's an industry project spinning up that I've been quite involved with, and we actually think that ZEDEDA and a lot of the open source stuff that we're talking about would be part of it around developing trust fabrics. It's called Project Elvarium. There's a pretty cool video there at elvarium.org that I'd recommend checking out. But this is like, how do I drive trust across interconnected ecosystems, retail and insurance and healthcare and utilities all sort of crossing over into the home and businesses and, true Internet of Things, this notion of ambient computing. You have to automate trust at scale, and to get there, you have to have some semblance of an open foundation. Imagine if the internet was owned by one company, much less a few. So very important to be thinking about open core models as you evolve your business. So next slide. I know a lot of you guys are in the open source community that are tuning in, a lot of folks. So I don't have to preach the value of open source, but it's also translates into the business side. So if you look at the spectrum from constrained devices in the field to the centralized cloud, massively scalable cloud resources, it's a continuum. I recommend, if you haven't read it, the LF-Edge taxonomy paper that we put out as a community last year defines the edge with inherent technical trade-offs, non-ambiguous language like thin and thick, near and far, etc. What we're talking about today is the distributed edge. So this is on the left side constrained by the last point where you have enough compute resources to run cloud native, to run Kubernetes or virtualization. That's about 512 megs of memory, single box, on the left, embedded in a wind turbine or a machine. On the right, it scales up through clusters on the factory floor, or maybe a retail store. I might have a gateway on a factory floor. On the right, it bleeds into the fringes of the data center. Solved problem, generally speaking, there's evolution for the regional edges for Kubernetes today. But once you start bleeding into this distributed edge, you're starting to get where the footprint becomes a problem. This is why K3S, why Rancher pioneered K3S with the community. I'm outside of a physically secure data center. Someone can walk up and touch that infrastructure. You have a very strong need for a zero trust security model. The scale factor gets higher. Tens of public clouds that matter over time, small number, trillions of devices, constrained devices over time, and there's an exponential scale in between. So it's just a different set of considerations when you get to distributed edge. And then we'll talk about that as we get into more detail, but very important to talk about which edge before we get into it. So next slide. So these are the types of edges. These types of remote environments. Could be a machine on a factory floor that I'm deploying as a service. We'll give a customer example there. Demand response, substations, trucks, you name it. Very, very remote, highly expensive to go out and drive trucks to manage them. I call that driving sticks, like USB sticks to the sticks. You need remote orchestration for these types of deployments. Next slide. So there's a variety of patterns that we see. So this is what's called the Purdue model. It's been around for a while. So the different levels within a factory, and this same thing applies to a variety of different situations. And then of course, if you've got discrete assets, like a truck or something in the field, same thing. So ZEDEDA helps to orchestrate infrastructure management and security, and we'll talk about that. SUSE's assets would come in on top as a key part of our collaboration. So we would help deploy assets at its layers within an infrastructure. In simplest terms, I'm helping to orchestrate apps to like an IoT gateway. It's sitting in that green layer right above the control network. It's pulling data out, doing some local analytics, normalizing data from a lot of different protocols, and feeding that out to broader parts of the network. Since ZEDEDA is not in the data path, our orchestration is from the cloud, but the data can stay on-prem, or it can go straight to a cloud resource like Azure IoT, your choice. But that's important. So it could be an IoT gateway. We see customers coming and saying, hey, I want to deploy dedicated security nodes at different points in these layers for segmentation. I want to impart root of trust into my infrastructure. I want to do protocol translation or inspection. So we work with companies like Nozomi and CyberX as part of Microsoft to deploy these types of apps. We see classic workload consolidation. This is where the Kubernetes really comes into play. You start seeing that creeping down into the factory floor. I'm running clusters on top of these various different layers. And we're also seeing a lot of telcos coming in saying, hey, I want to deploy managed services. So that's where this number 4, the cloud gateway, comes in. I'm doing private 5G or CPE equipment. Again, what ZEDEDA does, and of course also with SUSE with the managed clustering, we can offer that infrastructure for you to just kind of focus on the applications and your services. So next slide. So let's jump in one more. Okay, so ZEDEDA's got 2 components to our solution. We monetize, we sell our cloud orchestration console, subscription-based, you pay as you grow, priced based on the node volume. There's you buy a tenant and then you pay for the node volume. It's all about distributed edge computing. As I mentioned, not in the data path at all. You choose where your data goes, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. We support any type of hardware, and that's running EVE-OS. So EVE-OS is part of the Linux Foundation's Edge umbrella. It's alongside projects within LF-Edge like EdgeX Foundry and Fledge and the Crano and other projects. And by putting it there, it makes it completely open APIs, open source, vendor neutral governance that you get from the Linux Foundation, just like Kubernetes was born there and Rancher put K3S within CNCF. And so that's important. So you've got this completely open, curated operating system, bare metal, that supports any hardware, can support any combination of different workloads. Of course, we're going to focus on Kubernetes here, but virtual machines just as well, and native Docker containers. And you run it out in the field, and then those open APIs are what connects to the ZEDEDA cloud. I mean, anybody could build a console for it. We really think it's important to have that open foundation because it not only unifies an ecosystem of hardware, software, different services partners around that open base, but it also prevents lock-in, even to us. But we see a lot of people that like the fact that they can build their own, but just would rather just use our console, which can even be white labeled. And that Android at the edge analogy is EVE-OS is like the Android analogy, curated for bringing together that ecosystem of hardware and software. And so that's the 2 components: our cloud and the open source EVE-OS from Linux Foundation. Next slide. So I won't get into all the details, but think of it as like, you put EVOS on a box, bare metal, your choice of silicon, including GPUs, FPGAs. EVOS provides that abstraction layer that makes your life a lot easier for applications on top. And the hardware providers like it because it abstracts all the different applications. You could skew EVOS as this universal operating system from your factory, and any application works on top. So now you can digitally fulfill solutions without having to create an individual SKU for every software stack that you sell out of your factory. Can run any combination, as I mentioned, VMs, containers, clusters, which we'll focus on today. The VM support is important because there's a lot of legacy out there. You can't just tell everybody to go to cloud native. There's a lot of Windows apps, whether they're SCADA systems or HMI, a lot of the historians, out in the factory or process control industries, point of sale systems, video surveillance systems, all of the stuff out there that people have been deploying for years, it's all Windows based today. So since ZEDEDA took an approach of, a lot of they're taking a container first approach, we started with virtualization. There's an embedded hypervisor, which is actually modular. You can take your choice within EVOS, Zen, KVM, and we're working on Acorn, which is more of a real-time hypervisor, all open source, of course. And it's got all these features for security, which we'll talk a little bit about. And it creates this base that then you have that flexibility, including legacy workloads. EVOS uses root of trust in the hardware, creates a crypto-based ID that then is used for the credentials to log into the orchestration cloud. Of course, in our case, it's zCloud from you. Now you can't log into the box locally anymore. This is important. One of the threat vectors is people just walk onto the the shop floor and start logging in locally and adding software, and things can happen. We can shut down remotely IO ports, so cut off all the USBs, et cetera, so you can prevent insider attacks. You log in, it creates that secure foundation. We have a distributed firewall that says this app can only talk to that app on this box. This app can only talk to that backend, and you can visualize all that in the cloud. So EVOS is the enabling element, vendor neutral open source. And again, we monetize the cloud, gives you complete visibility into the operations. At scale, you can see the network flows of what apps are talking to what, which is very important when you look at the factory type deployment. You got these different layers and IT and OT. You need to make sure data is going where it's supposed to go. And then we have an app marketplace, which now we have K3S image in it, as we'll talk about. That's sort of like the analogy. EOS is the Android of the edge. The app marketplace is kind of like the Google Play Store. There's a public one where we're adding not only the Kubernetes distribution, but also things like Azure IoT Edge and Ignition Edge if you're in the industrial world, kept server, Greengrass, things like that, other popular open source tools. And then you can create private marketplaces if you white label our console. So lots of flexibility, regardless of how you're building your infrastructure. Next slide. And so just to stress it, native Docker containers, important. EVOS is that universal base, but equally important is that VM support that it enables. I mentioned legacy Windows apps. You give people a transition path to cloud native because you support both. A lot of industry folks are like, I've qualified my stack on Yocto or some Linux distribution, Ubuntu. We can host that in a guest VM, and even the drivers can be passed through EVOS transparently to that hardware because we virtualize the IO. And it also happens that the VM support is very handy for container runtimes like Kubernetes or Azure IoT Edge or Greengrass and more. So very, very flexible compared to others that have been focusing again in container only. Distributed edge, we feel like strategically it's important to be able to focus on any app workload type. Next slide. Yeah, just a quick view of the types of visibility you get, geographically dispersed nodes, all the hardware performance. We do both hardware and application management. Single clicks, you'll see some of this in the demos, so I don't want to spend too much time on here. Next slide. And then the open ecosystem is a big part of it. We're seeing more and more hardware makers provide, EVOS out of the factory as an option. So that makes it easy. Grab a box, you plug in into power networking. At that point, you leave and you start clicking buttons. And as we'll show today, that includes forming clusters. Different types of IoT interoperability stacks, industrial connectivity, security plugins on top of our Zero Trust Foundation, the cloud players, and then of course, SUSE is a key collaboration for us. Next slide. And a lot of those apps, of course, would be in our marketplace as well. So a couple of customer examples, and I want to hand it over to Tom. So there's 3 personas, well, actually 4. One is developer community, and we'll talk about that towards the tail end. A machine builder is someone, we've got 2 public case studies that we'll share, I think, as a follow-up. Machine builders are building connected machines, they're offering as a service, kind of new business models for their customers. Of course, make the customers happy and more efficient and whatnot, but also being able to offer new connected services. Bob's is a great example. They were looking at how do we develop and manage this hardware or the software on this hardware embedded within their connected machines. They make big machines for packaging materials like labeling and cardboard cartons and things like that. And the case study walks through how we went from like 0 to production, introduction to production in 5 weeks. This is the benefit of leveraging existing supported technologies. They love the fact that it was open. They said that it saved them probably 6 months of development time, and they saw value at just 10 machines. We did a webinar with them, several weeks back, and literally it's like the business case. It's complicated to manage this stuff in the field in the real world. So great example of the value prop. PeopleFlow is using us to deploy Azure IoT Edge. We have an integration with Microsoft. They're deploying modules for AI optimization of these industrial pumps. The solution OEM, this was actually our first collaboration with SUSE / Rancher with a big oil and gas services provider. A lot of these solution OEMs, they've got a combination of software and services and hardware, and they're looking to SaaSify their business, offer things more as a service. Here we're consolidating Windows-based workloads alongside the container base, and of course in clusters. They wanted a dual box cluster just for uptime, for redundancy. And then the end user, this manufacturer, very large, well-known name, we just not public yet, but this is a great example where we have to help split the difference between the operations group and IT. Machine builders, solution OEMs, they've got all those relationships. They're just looking for solutions that, like what we're offering, we're talking about jointly today, to help them scale new types of applications. And then user, you have to work with both the operations group and IT. In this case, operations wanted to get data out of the factory process, kind of that green bar, above that green bar in that previous diagram, up into Azure IoT. IT was like, well, let's look at the security benefits or security of the solution. And they looked at ZEDEDA, and based on our Zero Trust architecture, like, hey, cool, you can put that on my network. We always say that these solutions need to be OT trusted and IT approved. And you got to play to the needs of both different organizations, uptime on the factory floor, security, of course, for the data. So just some examples of the types of patterns that we see. Next slide. I think I want time to hand it off to Tom. Cool. All right. Yeah. So Tom, I'll hand it off to you, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the integration.
Fantastic. And thanks for inviting me to the webinar. I'm really excited to be here. I think whilst I'm going to be focusing on Rancher and K3S specifically, I think it's important to understand the context in which they exist, given that Rancher Labs was acquired by SUSE at the end of last year. Things have changed. So what I'm going to be presenting is not a pure Rancher K3S story. It's more of a combined portfolio offering. I'll try not to make it too salesy, because I'm sure that you didn't want to spend lots of time being pitched at. I'm not a sales guy, but I do want to focus in on the value proposition of SUSE and how it's really trying to reposition itself in the ecosystem differently now after the Rancher acquisition. Next slide, please. So obligatory company snapshot. I'd like to say that SUSE doesn't need any introduction. I'm not sure that's entirely true necessarily, particularly with American audiences. Very big in Europe. I mean, most people including myself, quite surprised to learn that SUSE has been around for almost 30 years. And they were the first to market when it came to enterprise Linux distributions. They kind of cracked the code of how do you make money out of open source software. SUSE has grown to be a global leader in innovative and reliable enterprise-grade open source solutions, not just Linux. There's all sorts of other things that it's done in the past. And today, SUSE solutions are powering thousands of blue chip customers on mission-critical workloads. So I've got a couple of examples here: banking systems and enterprise applications like sort of huge sort of SAP installations, for example. We do a lot of work in the automotive space around autonomous vehicles and things like that, which is pretty interesting. We're working with satellite companies. Before I came onto this webinar, I was on the SUSECon virtual event and was listening to a case study by a guy from Hypergiant, which is a satellite company that's actually deploying K3S into space, which is a very harsh environment. You don't really think about what problems are caused by extreme cold and all that kind of stuff, but that's very cool. Again, shameless plug, go to SUSECon and check it out. And of course, we're working with the world's sort of largest sort of healthcare manufacturers to build out some intelligent devices. So fast facts: yes, we work with the majority of the world's largest banks, the majority of big pharma companies, aerospace companies, all the ones that you would expect, car manufacturers, and all of the top technology firms in the world are customers of ours. The industry initiatives and the partnerships, really important. It was very important to Rancher, and I think that was one of the reasons why we saw so much synergy between the two companies as one was acquired by the other. We're very much involved in the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, with leadership on the CNCF board and so forth. And also in the Linux Foundation and its various sort of guises. Lisa's on there, which is a relatively new thing that we're getting involved with around automotive. Big into telco, do a lot of work with the world's telco companies, and Active and ORAN and so forth. And SUSE's got a really strong reputation in HPC, and so we take a deep interest in the power ecosystem, the mainframe projects, and so forth. And of course, we work with all the large sort of system integrators, hyperscalers, and so forth. So onto the more interesting stuff. Next slide, please. So we believe that every business is on a journey of digital transformation, and more so now than ever, given that we've had to sit through 18 months or so of COVID. That transformation is being powered by innovation. And in today's hyper-connected world, innovation is occurring virtually everywhere, whether it's in the data center, whether it's in the cloud or at the edge, or if you're Hypergiant, beyond, up in space. And the most successful businesses will be those that harness their innovation, no matter where it occurs. And so our mission at SUSE is to help our customers and honestly, our community as well, the people who don't pay us money but use our technology, to innovate everywhere. So next slide, please. So the world has changed dramatically. As I said, and innovation is more critical to the success than it ever has been before. Businesses like yours have to offer their goods and services in very different ways than in the past. And the global pandemic has only accelerated that shift. You need to integrate digital technology, software, and infrastructure into everything that you're doing. And this is resulting in a fundamental change to business culture, operational processes, and value delivery to your customers. And to adapt most quickly to these changes and enable rapid innovation, you need to take an agile approach to IT, software development, and delivery. So SUSE helps you achieve this by addressing challenges in three key areas. I'll try and be brief. The first one is hybrid cloud IT. You need software applications running in multiple environments across your hybrid cloud infrastructure, and more of those apps will be running as a service, whilst core apps will remain on premises for compliance and security reasons. Workloads, including mission critical ones, have to be able to run reliably everywhere, on premises and across clouds and as containers or within virtual machines. And you're likely moving some of your legacy applications to the cloud to gain agility and reduce cost, but you also want to avoid the lock-in. This is a really crucial component of our story, is to avoid the lock-in into any individual public cloud provider or any kind of software monoculture, to be fair. And at the same time, as increases in compute power and network speeds converge, more of your applications and data will move to the edge to improve performance and transact business faster. So SUSE helps you simplify and optimize your entire hybrid cloud environment by providing you with a platform for consistent management of legacy, modern, and containerized workloads, no matter where they're running, whether it's on premises, in multiple clouds, or at the edge. The next one is cloud native transformation. Application modernization is another important step in becoming more agile. And many organizations spend a large percentage of their budget supporting legacy workloads. And for example, you may have a mainframe application running business critical workloads, but the resources to maintain that application are increasingly scarce or non-existent. Time and resources focused on legacy workloads is time and resources not focused on modernization and innovation. So organizations need help in accelerating the modernization of their legacy applications. And it's not just legacy applications that are costly and complex. Developing new modern applications can also be very challenging. So SUSE helps increase developer efficiency, reduce technology debt, and accelerate adoption of cloud native technologies, and ultimately helps you deliver innovative projects faster. And then lastly, the edge, which I guess is the main focus of the webinar. And as I've mentioned, every organization is expanding their infrastructure beyond some traditional boundaries, beyond the data center and the cloud to the edge. And as a result, the breadth and complexity of the edge use cases that exist are increasing rapidly, while at the same time, organizations have concerns about security and privacy and compliance and so forth. So SUSE helps you fully embrace the edge, develop, deploy, and manage your applications across all edges, and there are a number, but I won't go into too much detail today, to gain new insights and ultimately create new, compelling and differentiating customer experiences. So by helping our customers achieve all of this, SUSE is supporting them to innovate freely everywhere. So the next slide, please. And we're, oh, I think you've gone one too many, actually. There we go, great. And at SUSE, we're uniquely positioned to provide insight and services around two core technologies that are required to allow our customers to innovate everywhere. And those happen to be containers, Kubernetes, and Linux. And we're obviously a leader in both. So at the heart of our strategy is our leadership in these two most important technologies powering digital transformation, Linux and Kubernetes. When it comes to running all workloads, one size of Linux operating system doesn't fit all. And that's why we offer the industry's most adaptable Linux operating system. No matter what your workload requirements are, performance, reliability, and so forth, we have an operating system solution purpose-built for your needs. And if you're running OSs from other vendors, that's no problem at all. We have a management tool called SUSE Manager, which provides a single platform for managing all of your Linux operating systems, whether it's on premises and in the cloud. And one of the other things I like to mention actually in the next release of SUSE Linux Enterprise Server, which is 15 SP3, one of the most important components to that release is that we're actually creating binary compatibility between SLES 15 SP3 and OpenSUSE 15.3 as well. So the benefits of that is just sort of seamless deployment of applications between those two environments without having to reboot or install anything like that. Basically, it's like a sort of CentOS-like environment that perhaps you're losing in the future if you're currently on CentOS. Getting to the Kubernetes component, SUSE offers the industry's only container management platform that provides full management of all Kubernetes distributions. That includes cloud-hosted distributions as well, the major ones. Whether managing one cluster or 1 million clusters, Rancher, or it will become SUSE Rancher, the sort of the version that you can buy, provides a simple and consistent management experience, no matter what Kubernetes distribution you're using for your use case, on premise, in the cloud, or at the edge. we're not in the game of trying to convince you to use, there's one Kubernetes distribution to rule them all. Not at all. That's not where we play. So together, our leading or industry leading Linux operating system and Kubernetes management technologies give you the power to address today's business challenges and the flexibility to adapt your strategy to address tomorrow's challenges as they evolve. So the next slide, please. I think I just want to really sort of stress this as a key differentiator for where SUSE and SUSE Rancher exist. And we call it open interoperability, our open interoperable approach. Not only is SUSE a leader in the two most important technologies powering digital transformation, but unlike our competitors, I should say, who focus on locking you into their proprietary technology stacks, what I also call a vendor monoculture, our open and interoperable approach puts you in control to choose any of technology that's most suitable for your use case, and will support you in that. So for Linux, for example, whilst we have SLES and we have different variations of SLES for SAP is very, very popular. We've just released SLE Micro as well. We do provide support for other leading Linux operating systems. Ubuntu, the guys I used to work for Canonical, they're behind that. Lots of people use Amazon Linux, Oracle Linux, and Red Hat, and so forth. So we support that, and particularly within SUSE Manager. And then for Rancher, we have RKE there, which is our sort of on-prem variant, Kubernetes variant, which we recommend. There's certain sort of capabilities with Rancher that it has, which are advantageous, like rolling updates and stuff like that. But also K3S, which has really emerged as like the de facto standard lightweight Kubernetes operating system you can deploy pretty much everywhere. Now obviously we support those and we encourage people to use them because they're actually really, really good distributions. But we're not limited to that. Rancher or SUSE Rancher supports any CNCF certified Kubernetes distribution, including the leading cloud hosted distributions. And what we're talking about there isn't just being able to import a cluster and look at it. We offer full lifecycle management for Amazon EKS, and we're going to extend that out to Azure AKS and Google GKE. So sort of full lifecycle management of clusters in those hosted providers from a single pane of glass, and you can mix that with any on-prem infrastructure you might have or edge infrastructure, all sort of benefiting from the same unified experience and policy management and so forth. Next slide, please. Right, so our open interoperable approach means that you can run any Kubernetes distro on any on SUSE Linux, and you can run Rancher Kubernetes on any Linux distro. They're literally interoperable. But we also believe that you can benefit even more when you adopt both SUSE Linux and SUSE Rancher as products. And for that reason, we offered, and have just released actually today, which is why I'm mentioning it, these two solution bundles, one called SUSE Hybrid IT, and another, which is, I guess, more relevant here, which is SUSE Edge. So they share some of the main sort of interdependent components. So SUSE Hybrid IT solution consists of SUSE Rancher, RKE, Longhorn, which is our persistent storage solution, which we developed, but we've given it to the community through the CNCF, and also SLE Micro. Sorry, I should say SLES rather than SLE Micro, offering a complete software stack needed to run both traditional applications and cloud native applications in the data center and at the cloud. Now, SUSE Edge is a solution that consists of SUSE Rancher, K3S, the lightweight Kubernetes operating system, also Longhorn, which is very effective in those kinds of use cases as well, and SUSE Manager, and then SLE Micro, which is a lightweight Linux operating system that benefits from many of the same sort of compliance and security benefits of its big brother SLES. So SUSE Edge offers a complete software stack needed to deploy applications in very large numbers at the edge, whether you're running Linux or whether you're running Kubernetes or both. Right, so that's the sort of holistic combined story. If we go to the next slide, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about Rancher, where I'm particularly passionate about Rancher because of my background. So it's the industry's, and I do honestly believe this, it's the best platform for full lifecycle management of all Kubernetes clusters. And everything I'm talking about really today is not, I'm not trying to sell it to you. You can go and get it for free. Rancher is downloadable from GitHub. It's unfettered access. We don't and won't do an open core kind of approach to the new version of SUSE Rancher. SUSE Rancher is the name that we're going to be giving the commercial package around support for Rancher, which we might additionally add some value-added services around it going forward, but the core will still be Rancher. So next slide, please. So our unique approach, and I'll do this very quickly because I'm sure that we're sort of running out of time. We believe that it's a multi-cluster world, back in the day, there was a lot of focus on just building big complex clusters, and we were the first to market to say, hey, listen, actually, you need to break these down and manage them centrally in a single control plane. And it is a multi-cluster world. And one CNCF certified Kubernetes distribution isn't better than the other, and anybody who tries to convince you otherwise is just trying to lock you in. So that's very much, that's core to our sort of as a core differentiator for us. And we treat all Kubernetes distributions as first-class citizens. It's taken a while to provide full LCM for AKS and GKE, but that's just coming out. And we believe actually all the value is in the management piece itself. And we do that using an open approach to open source software. There are vendors, open source vendors out there who do try to lock you into a vendor monoculture. We are not one of them. So next slide, and this is my last one. So if you've been to a Rancher online meetup or whatever, you may have seen a version of this. We used to call it the cube cake. Maybe I'll just continue to call it the cube cake. It's really our recipe to enable production quality Kubernetes everywhere. And it's made up of some simple layers. First of all, there's the support for obviously SLES, but also other enterprise grade Linux operating systems. And on top of that, it's the the full support for any certified CNCF certified Linux, Kubernetes distribution at the bottom. RKE preferred for data centers, K3S, which is great obviously for the edge, but we're also seeing a lot of it deployed for development because it's so easy to spin up and kind of foolproof, ready to get going. But also our cloud story around EKS, AKS, and GKE. And then SUSE Rancher sits on top of that, providing simplified cluster operations and infrastructure management, whether it's lifecycle management, pool management, cluster templates, configuration management, and so forth. GitOps continuous delivery came out in 2.5. And then security and authentication is another piece. That was one of the main reasons why a lot of our customers came to Rancher in the first place, was because our capabilities in this area were so much more easier to use than alternatives. So that's integrating with Active Directory and Open LDAP and so forth. And then we have a really strong policy enforcement and security and governance story within Rancher, making it easy to apply best practices across your entire estate, no matter how many clusters you have, avoiding configuration drift of your servers. And then the top one is platform services. This is really about how we went about maximizing the adoption of what was essentially a free product. How do you actually get people to use it? We did that by integrating the open source tools that they're already reusing and making it really easy to use Grafana and Prometheus for observability, or launching Istio Service Mesh, or deploying a persistent storage capability like Longhorn with just one click. So together, that is really the reason why there's been over 100 million downloads. There's over 35,000 production deployments of Rancher, and we're sort of very excited now to be part of SUSE and to go to market in this more sort of holistic way. And like I said, do go to SUSECon. It's great fun, and hope to see you there. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Great. Thanks, Tom. So we're gonna quickly talk about the integration with Kubernetes, and then we'll show a portion of the video demo. You'll get all these links after the fact, but just kind of make it a little bit more tangible as we get into some live screens on the UI. Next slide. We talked about a lot of this. The reason why data center tools, a lot of great tools out there, they just don't scale down to the distributed edge in terms of footprint and the diversity of the hardware. Data center solutions call the server and say, hey, this is the software you should be running. At the distributed edge, you need the box to phone home. So don't call us, we'll call you. And you have to assume that box is going to lose connection. Some of the security issues that we talked about. Next slide. So if you look at EVE-OS as that foundation, a lot of great tools coming down. Of course, K3S that Rancher has pioneered, and you've got different distributions. They start to struggle when you get into the distributed edge in terms of that needing that footprint. EVE-OS we've basically built as that lowest common denominator that starts at that last point where you just can't support virtualization or containerization. You have to go embedded. So these are example open source projects. And then we're bringing it up to intersect the Kubernetes paradigms. You've got kind of like that right foundation from a security standpoint, the flexibility, et cetera, and the ecosystem. And then it scales up. Next slide. And so, just to kind of drive the point home is, we're managing the infrastructure, both the hardware and getting that distribution out to the hardware and managing that entire life cycle. And then in this case, SUSE is managing the Kubernetes clusters themselves with all the great tools that they have and the services. Separating the infrastructure plane from the application plane is a very common practice. We have not seen that in some of the IoT platforms out there, but you're going to inevitably have lots of different types of applications, both legacy and modern, different service providers hitting your environments. And so having that consistent security management experience, regardless of the applications on top is super important for scale. Next slide. And so, so this kind of shows that zoomed in where we're providing two pieces of the puzzle. And then as you'll see, the demo teaser, we'll get through some of the basics in about 5 minutes in this video coming up. We've just greatly simplified the whole creation of clusters. So if you go ahead and play the video, make it a little bit more tangible.
In this screencast, we will go over ZEDEDA's SaaS portal and how it lets you manage your edge node, orchestrate your edge applications on those edge nodes. We will specifically look at how collection of edge nodes can be brought together to orchestrate a Kubernetes cluster. One thing to keep in mind is that the ZEDEDA offering is limited to orchestrating of the Kubernetes cluster. The clusters can be stitched to a management tool like Rancher for activating any application workloads. So let's go into the details of the cluster instance. So if you go into the cluster instance here, you will end up seeing the two cluster instances that are active. So one of these particular cluster instance actually has orchestrated Kubernetes. This test cluster instance is in active state, and it is actually has a edge node pool size of 1. That means this is only one device which is basically forming the Kubernetes cluster. That means there are multiple VMs being placed on one single device. Of course, in order for you to achieve high availability, you would want multiple devices to be part of that particular Kubernetes instances. And let's go into the details of the multi-device cluster instance, which basically has two devices. So as you can see here, these are the two devices that create a Kubernetes cluster. One of these particular devices has a role of a server, which is also called as a seat server. The seat server acts as a master in Kubernetes, and that basically has the API server running, and that is running on an edge node called BLR, Supermicro ZC4. And then there is an agent node, which is actually going to have application workloads on there. So you could just simply click on these particular edge app instances to see what exactly is going on these edge apps. So if you click on those particular app instances, you can see the master, which is in an active state, and it has been up for quite a long time. And you can see the basic info and different pieces of information on how this thing looks like. So this is the environment in which the master is running, and you can also see what all particular adapters. So it has one adapter H0 which is connected, and there are different events that have happened on this edge app instances as it came online. You could see that, hey, it was in a created state, then it got into the active state, and it continues to generate different events. Right from your fingertips, you can actually go and take a look at all the logs that have been generated for this particular app instances. So this is an extremely powerful feature where you have remote cluster and the cluster misbehaves, and you want to go and take a look at the logs and whatnot, right? These information is directly available at your fingertips using our orchestration pieces for your cluster instances. So going back to the cluster instances, you will see, hey, you know what, you can, if you had like 5 devices acting within a cluster, you will end up seeing all these particular things right here. So you can also go and get similar kind of information on the edge instances which are running for the agent node. That means the workload scheduler nodes. So as I mentioned initially, we do allow orchestration of Kubernetes cluster. However, the main stitching of application workloads on how to push the application workloads on these clusters is done using Rancher management. So in here, I'm going to show you this multi-device cluster, which we went into detail of, and how this is actually stitched to Rancher. So here you can see I'm logged into Rancher, and if you go into the clusters of Rancher, you will see this multi-device cluster. And if you go into the details of it, you will see how this whole thing is stitched together with Rancher. And you can see all Kubernetes managed objects in the kubeconfig and kubectl that you would want to accomplish are all stitched together with Rancher. So once you have a cluster active, we can of course have different actions associated with the cluster. You could deactivate a cluster. That means you just want to bring that particular cluster in a deactivated state, so that you can perform any kind of a management operations or a backup and restore or any other kind of operations, and then subsequently you can activate those particular clusters again. This is not dismantling of the cluster, but this is just partially making sure that the clusters are in a stopped state, so that you can do any kind of a management action.
All right. So sorry we had to cut the video short, but you'll get the video as part of the follow-up, along with we've got a solution brief that we did with Rancher and or the SUSE team. And as Mr. T says, you don't provision Kubernetes clusters manually at the edge. A reminder to ask questions. We're going to just jump through to the call to action and then back to Q&A. So one more slide. I'll come back to the summary for Q&A. One more. So the solution brief will be available when we send up the follow-up. It'll be linked from our website. Just kind of tells you more about the joint value prop as we collaborate with SUSE. Reach out to Tom or myself. We'll get you to the right people if you're interested in learning more. And also ZEDEDA has launched a developer program. It's kind of in alpha state today. We're doing selective onboarding of people. So if you're in the community working with Kubernetes, let us know. Reach out at community@zededa.com, and this is, grab a Raspberry Pi or a Intel NUC. We'll be adding Jetson Nano here very shortly. And just we'll offer a free trial to our cloud, make it really easy to onboard apps, get the security and management that you need for getting past POC stage, but get to hello world quickly. So stay tuned for more details, but definitely reach out if you're interested in potentially participating in that program. So with that, I go back to Q&A. Maybe if you want to go back to the summary slide, Leah, just so we have it. Yeah, so people can kind of read through this, as needed, but we've got about 5 minutes for Q&A. So let's see. Does ZEDEDA provide failover for VM workloads between edge nodes? We provide network, failover. We don't do stateful failover today, where you've got the data backed up in terms of cluster storage, but from a redundancy standpoint, absolutely between differences on the applications. We can definitely talk more offline if you're interested, but lots of different capabilities from switching between network functions and of course updating apps and the like. And then there's extra benefits you get within the Kubernetes clustering, of course. Other questions, or Leah, do we have any on your end?
Tom, question for you. What could you talk about the difference between SUSE and SUSE Rancher?
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's so Rancher is the Kubernetes management platform, an open source project that's available from GitHub. You can download it, unfettered access. We don't sort of reserve any features within Rancher just for our customers. SUSE Rancher is really the commercial wrapper around the services provided to our customers who want to use Rancher at scale. So that includes things like consulting, obviously break fix support, training. If you want a sort of hosted Rancher, for example, maybe you don't want to manage the control plane itself, we can look after that for you. Those sorts of things. And I think in the future, as we start, some of our innovation projects that we're developing, some sort of AI ML tools and things like that, which could well become sort of SaaS platforms in the future. We're kind of thinking about maybe rolling those into the subscription to add value to our paying customers. But Rancher itself is free. It's awesome. If you haven't used it, download it. It's very easy to deploy. And as Jason said, you really shouldn't be deploying any Kubernetes cluster by hand cranking it. Just use Rancher. I mean, it's the much easier option.
Thank you.
Yep, easy button. There is a question: how many clusters can you manage remotely? I'll answer real quick. If we have other ones, cool. But yeah, so the whole system is designed to be scalable, but you can add more tenants. We're seeing people, in the thousands, if not tens of thousands, when you're looking at kind of chain stores, in retail or the environments, that we talked about a bit in trucks. So yeah, I mean, tens of thousands, scaling up, not a problem over time. A lot of them start with kind of hundreds and then get into thousands and grow over time, but all doable through scaling out additional tenants.
Thank you. Could you talk a little bit about ZEDEDA's security benefits? Do we provide anything on that?
Yeah, so that's the big difference between, I think, ZEDEDA and some of the other options out there from an infrastructure management standpoint. Number one, it's the flexibility of VMs and containers. Number two, it's that truly open base, vendor neutral, but security, down to silicon, measure boot, remote attestation, crypto-based ID. You can't even log in anymore to the box. You have to go through the console, so with logging what's happened to that infrastructure over time. Distributed firewall, as I mentioned, apps talking only where they're supposed to talk. Very important when you have many different stakeholders coming in, which is common. When you look at building automation, you've got the tenant, you've got the building owner, you have service providers coming in, the utility. There's a lot of people that hit edge resources that you need to make sure that you separate out the communications to these types of devices, whether they're clusters or otherwise, and very, very robust security model built from the ground hardware, which is critical at the distributed edge. I might have time for one more question, although we are kind of at the hour. Real quick. So Antonio asked which VM hypervisor. So we support, it's modular. So EVOS, from open source that we leverage. We started with Zen. Now today, Zen, KVM is an option. Some users preferred KVM, and we're also working with the Acorn community. We're probably at MVP integration now for Acorn, which is more of a real-time hypervisor, very lightweight. Technically you could put whatever you want in there, but of course the value of open source is that the best way to vote is with your keyboard. Just dive in. We're always looking for contributors to EVOS. We're even looking at growing out the open source console that's in the project. Is pretty limited in function, but everyone benefits if we have more of a universal option for that foundation. The Android analogy that I mentioned, and then we can focus. And this is what's so great about SUSE, as Tom stressed, is they're even looking at various different distributions. You have to have choice when you're dealing with the flexibility required out in the field. Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, Leah, anything else real quick? I don't want to overuse people's time, but really appreciate you guys joining. And all of this, the material will be available. Reach out for questions. Lots of material online. Head over virtually to SUSECon, and all good. Yeah, and stay tuned for the developer program, as I mentioned as well, and reach out to community at ZEDEDA.com if you're interested in exploring that with the team, and dive on into EVOS and K3S and CNCF, go to town. So, yep, that's the drill. Mr. T approved.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Tom, for joining. Yeah, everyone have a great day, and thanks for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.